Hello, everyone. Welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be mediocre. I am joined today by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Susan Nash. Hi, Susan. How are you?
I'm great, and we are so honored to have a very, very esteemed guest today.
Yes. We will introduce him in a moment. In studio, we've got Harold Mugliotti. He's running the video switcher and doing the production. Here we go.
This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks.
And we are back. Susan, would you like to do the honors?
Absolutely. So I'd like to extend a very special welcome to John Hofmeister. John is former president of Shell America, and also after that he established Citizens for Affordable Energy, and he's been on a number of boards, extremely important in terms of basically changing thought and ideas about especially things like energy policy and the future. And he's right now sharing his knowledge through teaching as well as contributing to his boards and his organization. So welcome.
Thank you, Susan. And I'm really delighted to be here, and thank you, Rick, for inviting me.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome. And you've had an interesting career. You made it to president of Shell Oil, which is an accomplishment in and of itself. And now you're doing kind of the opposite, where you're taking the citizens and the consumers side a little bit more, though most of the time, I don't know, a lot of people complain about gas pricing, especially in the U.S., but it's not that high if you consider the taxes that are put on gas. Like, for example, I'm in California. I think for every dollar of gas price, we have probably 50 more cents of taxes put on it. So our taxes are about 33% of the gas price, so it makes, or the oil price, so it makes it sound like it's so much more expensive, but it isn't. It's the taxes that kill us. So it's just sort of interesting. But what made you go into kind of the other side, the citizen side, for affordable costs?
During my tenure as Shell Oil president, we experienced very high gasoline prices. And it was as a result of the shrinking production of U.S. production, domestic production, which happened in the years roughly 2000 to 2005, and the reliance on more imports. And so we had an artificially oil price. And I was a very customer-focused, customer-centric executive, because I know that if you're not serving your customers, you're not doing your business very well. So I took great empathy with the plight of American consumers, knowing full well that the reason for the shrinking availability of domestic natural production was all because of government policy. Mm-hmm. It had nothing to do with the industry's lack of interest in producing oil. It had everything to do with constraints on the availability of oil to produce. So I thought that in the best interest of consumers, let's revert to normal capital principles and invest more money in the production side. And lo and behold, it happened to coincide with the technological advances of opening up U.S. shale formations, which is a new way, a different way of getting oil out of the ground that works. And it's scientifically possible, it's environmentally responsible, and so companies were permitted by government policy to expand the technology, which involves hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling, to bring more oil to the marketplace. That's what happened, and that's been happening over the last decade. And so as a consequence, we have much more domestic production of oil in our energy flow, and that makes a big difference to the price of oil.
Susan?
Well, one thing that's interesting, when you were at Shell, you were kind of Shell Oil, you were basically a leader in the concept of ESG, which has now become basically what everybody thinks about. Could you describe ESG and explain maybe why it's become so important?
Sure, it's really one of my favorite topics. I'm not a lifetime oil and gas executive. I spent until age 50 working in companies that consume energy, both electrons, electricity, and molecules, oil and gas. And working in other industries, I was always remarking on the nature of oil and gas is basically it's mining. It's digging holes in the ground. It's by definition a dirty process to produce a dirty fuel, but a fuel that feeds our economy, that changes the nature of life on Earth. It destroys poverty. It produces, the improvements in life, not just mobility, but the clothes we wear, the buildings we work in, the houses we live in, the way in which oil and gas have permeated modern society, for all of its negatives, has changed dramatically all that we do in life, including the pharmaceuticals that we use. In fact, I'm anxious to see what's the final vaccine for COVID-19, because I suspect it will be an oil-based product in the medical field. It's just the nature of what it is that it's so valuable. So with coming back to ESG, and for those who aren't familiar, then ESG means responsibility with respect to the environment, the responsibility for the corporate social responsibility of impacting society, and good governance in the management of organizations. I said would say to myself and to my staff, with so much at risk in terms of the environment and the role of oil and gas in what it does to the environment. In the case of how we work with our communities and society more broadly, people don't understand what we do. We have a role and a responsibility to educate them as to what we do. And then finally, with respect to good governance, why would anyone endorse bad governance? So let's follow all the rules, all the spirit of the rules, as well as the technical aspects of the rules, and do the right thing in the way in which we govern our company, and meet the listing rules and be compliant and do it because we want to, not because we have to. So those are the kind of operating principles, and it was very much reflecting the totality of Shell, not just the U.S. side of Shell, but how Shell was approaching the challenges of the 21st century. And if I might just say one more word about that. When we started using oil and gas, there were 1.5 billion people in the world. That's it, 1900, 1.5 billion people. We didn't think about the environmental implications of oil. We thought about the goodness of what it was doing for us as a society and an economy. As we reached 1950, we had about 3.5 billion people on Earth. Still, environment wasn't as big a deal. But as we hit the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, now we're up over 6 billion people. We're pushing currently 7.5 billion people. We have to be much more conscious and much more responsible and take direct action on the environmental implications of using oil and gas, because it's beyond what the Earth can absorb. So we are deteriorating the Earth, and we have to reverse that, which we can do by changing how we approach managing the waste associated with the production of oil and gas, including the gaseous waste.
Well, I totally agree with that, and I really appreciate everything that you're saying about that entire kind of spectrum of concepts, but also mindset. And I was wondering, what do you think is the mindset of the future that we must sort of evolve into in order to deal with our new world?
I think I start from the premise that because we have learned how to harness energy for the good of society, we have to continue to do that. The only way to eradicate poverty around the Earth is to make sure that people from all walks of life have access to affordable, sustainable, and available energy, and so that they have the molecules and the electrons to improve their life, to improve their economic outlook. Now, at the same time, because there are so many of us, we have a responsibility to do what we can to change how we do what we do, and in particular, approach the waste management responsibility seriously. There's a term called net zero carbon, and then there's a term called net negative carbon. It's my belief that with introduction of technologies that work, we can continue to use all forms of energy, from nuclear to oil to gas to coal to biofuel to wind to solar to hydrogen, geothermal. We can use all forms of energy by moving to zero waste. Zero waste not only includes addressing the physical waste and the liquid waste, but the gaseous waste as well. We can eliminate it at its source, or we can take it out of the atmosphere as gaseous pollution, and with something called direct air capture. We can take that waste, bury it under the earth, or in some cases, with chemical engineering, reuse that waste, that carbon waste, carbon dioxide waste, to make useful projects or products that also take the waste out of the atmosphere. We can redefine certain chemical processes using certain additives to turn carbon dioxide, for example, into fuel, believe it or not, or into solids that could displace, let's say, wooden pallets or building materials in our homes. Instead of using wood, we use aggregate, a solid form of CO2. And as a consequence, we use engineering capabilities, a commitment to zero waste or negative net carbon waste, and we get rid of it, and we don't have the issue of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We don't have the issue of global warming, climate change, etc. But we continue to have access to all the energy we need to continue to improve the quality of life of people on Earth. That's a short 5-minute way of describing what I think is possible.
Well, it's really interesting because a lot of people don't talk about that as one of the problems, the waste, and it makes a lot of sense. They talk about the emissions and this and that, but very few people are talking about solutions to the emissions. So that actually, as you were talking, I was going, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, what you're saying and how you do it. I imagine we have the technology right now to address all of those.
Absolutely. This is not new that we have to wait for. It has never been required. There have never been regulations on managing gaseous waste. Let's be clear. Until 2007, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere was not even considered a pollutant in the atmosphere. It was a law case, Massachusetts versus EPA in 2007, that the Supreme Court ruled that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a pollutant and therefore under the management control of the Clean Air Act of 1972. It's been that long that we've had laws on the books to deal with the gaseous waste of exhaust from coal, oil, natural gas as it's combusted to address the CO2, but it was never regulated to do that since it was viewed as non-polluting. But the Supreme Court decided, no, it's polluting. And that changes the game entirely. And frankly, in 2000, 2005, 2010, I've been arguing as an executive of an oil company, and so has the oil company itself. From more than 20 years ago, the oil and gas company began pushing for more regulations, more controls, and more protection, in a sense, of society from waste management. But the rules of waste management were wide open and just exhausted out of your tailpipe, just exhausted out of your chimney stack. But with more and more tailpipes and more chimney stacks, the earth can't absorb all of that waste. But you know what? this is my opinion, and others may share the opinion, because this became politicized, politicians did not want to run on an agenda of waste management. They wanted to run on an agenda of punish the perpetrators, and the perpetrators are big oil. So punish big oil. Don't blame 200 million people for driving their cars and putting that, atmospheric pollution into every urban crack and cranny of our country. No, punish the oil companies who produce it, because the politicians take a view that, let's just be negative towards the producer rather than hold every polluter in the country, which is every driver of a vehicle, every home that has a chimney, every apartment house that has a chimney. We're all producing waste, but nobody's taking it into account. And so we're all breathing the air. We all have a common responsibility. And I would maintain that the benefit, the value of those molecules being burned in a car, taking a person to their job, or taking a bus to its end destination, or creating the warmth in winter in somebody's apartment or house because they have a furnace, that benefit is worth then having to deal with the consequences of that value by addressing waste management. But politicians don't like to talk about waste management. People think they're talking about garbage trucks running up and down the street. We're talking about support for the technologies and the methodologies to capture the carbon waste. That's what we're talking about.
I love it. Sorry. So I have a science fiction kind of scenario for you, John. Okay, so one of the things that we've found is that, let's just assume that current hostility toward oil production, et cetera, results in dramatic reduction of production. So then that means that there's not enough supply for, say, plastics or different types of petrochemicals. So we know that there are microplastics in the ocean, and we know that supposedly microplastics are coating, almost every place, and they're in the. So can you envision a moment in time where we're actually mining waste because we don't have enough now to be able to produce like plastics?
Well, I think the first negative of the science fiction scenario that you described is that the people who would be hurt the hardest and be hurt the first and foremost would be the people who have the least available resources to afford higher cost energy, because the first impact of scarcity would be the price. And so we would price out all of the elderly people depending upon their Social Security payments to live in the frigid northeast of the country or any cold place on earth in winter because they couldn't afford fuel. When I was president of Shell, there were documented cases of hauling frozen bodies out of homes in the U.S. Northeast because people were turning off their furnaces because they couldn't afford fuel oil. And they tried to keep warm with blankets and space heaters, but they died. They froze to death. And those are the first people to be hurt, or the low-income people who have to drive to get to their job. They can't live in urban areas because it's too expensive, so they live in the outer rural areas. They drive to work, but now they have to give up their job because they can't afford gasoline. It's too expensive. This is an absurdity of the way in which sometimes public policy attacks the source of energy rather than dealing with the waste consequences. But coming back to your plastics example, we know that for the last, 50, 60, 70 years, petrochemicals has been a huge and growing industry in this country, and it is still growing. Petrochemicals are everywhere. From the devices that we use, such as telephones, notepads, computers, electronics, television sets, whatever, dishes, silverware, all kinds of plastics everywhere. And sometimes they are disposed of, not sometimes, too often, they are disposed of irresponsibly. They find their way into water systems, which move them into rivers, which moves them into the whole, shifting of water into the ocean. And unfortunately, we have a global pollution crisis, in my mind, of petrochemicals, plastics, all over the place. We've started recycling them, but there's so much that gets away from the recyclers that affects the natural biosphere. So yes, harvesting, mining, or recycling plastics is a new source of plastic material. Let's be clear, for those who are not familiar with oil and gas, it all comes down to molecules. Molecules are from the oil or the natural gas, and they can be managed, manipulated, reformed. We can put additives into mixtures of molecules to make all kinds of different products. Using heat, using pressure, we can shape and reform molecules of oil over and over and over again as far as plastics. It's how we make pharmaceuticals. It's how we make all kinds of other products. That's how we replace people's hips, how we replace knees. These replacement devices are made of petrochemicals. And so the whole management of molecules is what we're talking about, which is easily enough done if you know what you're doing. And this constant recycling with heat and pressure and additives, it just reformulates all of the plastics that we could reuse over and over again and not have to drill for more crude oil by recycling the plastics that already exist.
I totally agree. And I'm thinking, with COVID-19, most of the personal protective equipment is made of plastics. Mm-hmm. So, the same people who are demonizing oil, they just aren't seeing the big picture. And I totally agree with you with respect to poverty and energy and needing to be able to use everything. I have a friend who's working in Germany, got a job with a nuclear agency there. They're actually working with the nuclear waste, but they're considering the nuclear waste as new fuel for nuclear power.
And that technology originated in the United States, and it was essentially banned for political reasons by Jimmy Carter during the Carter administration. It's called nuclear fuel reprocessing. As nuclear energy from uranium and its fissionable processing takes place, not all of the nuclear capability, not all of the energy from those pellets that represent the uranium fuel are exhausted in the energy producing process or the heat producing process. And we developed the processing technology that could separate the dead waste from the waste that still contained energy and reuse it. And so France basically took advantage of U.S. technology. And in France, nearly 80% of the energy in France comes from nuclear energy, mm-hmm. with zero CO2 pollution from their energy source.
But that gets
by
no publicity.
Reprocessing the nuclear waste, they reuse what is still usable in the waste process, and they bring it back up as recycled fuel and run it again. And so they keep doing that over and over again. And here's an example. If you took all of the waste, nuclear waste, of the nuclear plants of the United States, they would fit on a football field to the height of about 30 feet. If you took all the nuclear waste in France as a result of fuel reprocessing, it would fit in an old-fashioned telephone booth sitting on a corner of that football field.
Yeah, but you know what's sad?
Technology is amazing. We can do incredible things with it if we're allowed to do it. But because our government, thinking it knows best, shuts down nuclear waste reprocessing, we end up with waste we don't know what to do with. in pretty large quantities. 30 feet tall football field is a lot of waste. You wouldn't want it in your backyard, that's for sure.
No.
But we're not allowed to deal with it. We're also not allowed to bury it in a facility that we built in Nevada for $20 billion called Yucca Mountain National Nuclear Waste Repository with an act of Congress, because the politics of Nevada prompted Harry Reid, when he was majority leader of the Senate, to persuade President Obama, if he won the election, to shut it down. So now we have nowhere to put our waste, all because of the politics of managing it. Unfortunately, I have taken on a more and more negative view, frankly, of what our politicians do or don't do for the people of this country, because of their narrow-mindedness and their lack of understanding of what it is that they're actually doing when they make anti-energy decisions, or they hold information back, or they only use partial blips of information to maintain a political posture, which has nothing to do with either common sense or practical sense, but it only makes political sense. And so we suffer as a consequence of that unless we point it out and raise our voices and say, this just isn't working, which is what I'm trying to do, frankly, from my chair in society, with the issues of the need for energy, but also the need for management of waste.
Yeah, these are real important points, because we were talking a little bit pre-show about when politicians say it's about the science, usually you just have to hide or grab your wallet or something because they don't know anything about science. And sadly, they find a lot of scientists who are more than willing to back whatever they say for money. And unfortunately, those aren't exactly the most reputable of scientists. So a lot of the stuff that we have, like you mentioned, and even like the French, what they're doing, a lot of people don't know about that. And as a result, they don't believe it can be done. Your 60 Minutes will do a report on where do you put the fuel? What do you do? You're dead with atomic energy. And people just go, 60 Minutes said so. But they twist the reality to meet a certain narrative. And it's a shame, because we don't have really solid scientific leadership in the government on anything. Pandemics, to name one, as if we want to get current on things. It changes day to day. It depends whatever narrative the politicians want. Oh, we have a new pandemic rule today. That's not science.
Well, there's another naivete that gets expressed in political rhetoric. And that naivete is because too many politicians have decided to take on energy, take on the oil companies.
Yep.
The United States of America is the only nation on earth that has the level of animosity, the level of a diversity between the political prospects of its future and the reality of energy in society. Go to Europe, go to Asia, go to Africa, go Australia, anywhere else in the world, and there is a interdependency between energy producing and citizenry, where elected or appointed governments in China are recognized. Without energy, we have poverty. With energy, we eliminate poverty. What's the better deal here? Now, if on top of that, we can eliminate pollution, which we technologically know how to do, we just have to do it and have the regulations and the rules and the laws that enable it, we're home free. We don't need this adversity.
No.
And politicians proclaiming, I will ban fracking, or I will ban pipeline. I mean, they do that for populism purposes only, because it makes no sense whatsoever to deny the people of this country the energy they need.
Well, they also have no ability. They have no foundation into what's made out of oil products, for example. You mean my iPhone has something to do with oil? Oh. There was one congresswoman from New York recently who said she's going to ban everything. All oil, all fracking, everything. Get rid of it all. We're going to be an oil-free society. And people are laughing, going, do you have any idea what's made with oil? No. We're just going to ban it. So good luck. Even her makeup won't work anymore, probably. It's just amazing. and no clue. Just no clue whatsoever. But it sounds good. Yes, he's a social justice warrior for the climate industry and this and that, but no common sense. And it's sort of sad. Actually, it's funny when you were talking at the beginning that how much oil wasn't being used. That was under a president that was Texan at the time. That was Bush, who didn't do much for the oil industry, having come, I think, from oil. So it's sort of interesting how that works.
For political reasons, he had wanted nothing to do with it. He felt that it was like, the tar ball in the old Uncle Remus tales.
Yeah.
And nobody wants to touch the tar ball because they can't get rid of it. And he felt that touching oil was touching a tar ball. So he left it alone. It wasn't until July, believe it or not, July of 2008. He has 5 months left in office. He finally said publicly in a campaign appearance with John McCain, who was running desperately to catch up to Obama, that we need more oil. First time the president said it, July 2008, in his 7.5 year as president. We need more oil because the oil price was so high.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think the solution is, aside from the work you're doing? How do you train government to be responsible to this and to understand where do we go?
The industry itself has a direct responsibility to explain to the American people and to the people who represent the American people the full story on energy, the full story on all forms of energy. And really, we owe our children, and have owed our children for generations, and we've denied them, the understanding of the role of molecules and electrons in society. We don't teach anything about energy in school. And so generations of Americans grow up without any awareness of how molecules and how electrons impact their daily life. It's taken as a given. It's a given we have electricity. Just flip a switch. It's a given that we have cars. Just turn on the ignition. Fill it up occasionally. And because it's never explained, and we don't put it into our school curriculum, we allow ignorance to prevail. Unawareness is the modus operandi. And so we create our own problem. And I think we have many politicians who don't mind letting problems get created rather than addressed because it prolongs them in office. And we have politicians who have 20, 30, 40-year careers in elected office who have never questioned, never had any curiosity about what is behind public policies that harm society, or don't educate children, or don't properly provide nutrition to our people, and allow all kinds of poor nutrition to be built into basic food systems. And so there's all of this ignorance among the elected officials of the Republic, who I think are contributing either or even worse, directly, to problems in society that aren't being addressed.
Yeah, that's a real good point. Term limits. That might help a bit. But I remember I think it was a congressman who thought if too many people moved to one side of an island, the island might tip. I was watching going, really? Brilliant.
That's a true story. Yes.
It is true. It is true. I saw it. I was watching I think C-SPAN or whatever he was on. I was going, really? Wow.
That's amazing.
It's just sad.
Very sad.
Don't have a concert on that island because it might flip over.
That's right. Anyway, John, we wish you the best in what you're doing and the efforts you're making because, gosh knows, we need more of that. We need people to bring out, and like you said, getting all the other companies involved, because there's a lot of marketing against oil companies, and it's mostly from the government trying to make everybody look bad in oil, how evil oil is and this and that, with no clue that if you get rid of oil, you get rid of pretty much modern society. Good luck. Let's go back to Neanderthals. They don't get it. They just don't get it. And now, on the show notes, we'll have a way for people to get a hold of you or to contact the organization. So hopefully that, it's a start. Get people to contact and start getting more involved in what you do. Do you folks do outreach programs in terms of education or anything else?
Yes, continuously. I spend a good bit of my time in outreach efforts, and I generally work through LinkedIn or Facebook in terms of the interconnection with society. And so we're available literally 24/7. We get back to people very quickly. I've spoken in everything from church sanctuaries to 20,000 person stadiums.
Right.
So I'm quite happy to get involved with people to help people understand what's possible. And I think if the rest of the oil and gas industry began an outreach program that went along some of the lines that I'm pursuing, there would be a much calmer conversation about the future of energy in this country. People would have much greater understanding of there is something in it for me. This is not just about hostility to producers. And if I am hostile to producers, I have that right. But then don't complain when the price of oil goes way up and the price of gasoline goes from $2 to $5 because of the restrictive policies put on it by people who don't want to understand molecules and electrons.
Yeah. John,
so true. And I keep thinking now that we're having so many people who are wanting to have what they call learning pods with their children. So instead of sending them back to school, and instead of strictly homeschooling, they're hiring subject matter experts to teach certain subjects, and then just kind of maybe a couple times a week. And I think what a great opportunity to have materials for the learning pods.
You're absolutely right.
So there's so much we can do. I really appreciate and admire what you're doing.
And John, we're just about out of time, but you're a special guy. Just from meeting you for a couple of minutes and talking with you, we need more Johns out there like you. What do you think? And this is kind of a question we ask people on the show. What do you think in life gave you that edge to make you who you are and what you are? Because obviously you're not just the business guy. There's a set of ethics and values and more in you that comes out, and it's that paying it forward mentality. What made you who you are?
I think it comes down to the simple act of reading. I was encouraged by my parents, by my teachers, read. Somewhere along the line, I learned you are what you read. And I took that seriously. And the more I read, the more questions I had. And then the more I looked into it, the more was written about it. So the reading became voracious. And so I generally, still to today, many, many years later, I'm reading continuously from multiple sources and listening, sometimes aggressively listening, because the more I hear, the more it runs through my mind. And so just being curious and finding ways to absorb information, and reading to me is my tool, my best tool for how I learn more.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I know it's funny. Out of all these years, we've done the show about 5-6 years. No one's given that answer. That's a first. And it's a very good answer because current generations don't read very much. If you go to a Barnes & Noble, you'll see older people and really young people and not much in between. It's sort of sad. And it's not that they're reading digitally either. They're just not reading a lot. It's watching movies and TV and other things, but they're missing out. And some people will read on the internet, and it's kind of the same idea if you can read and take that journey to where it takes you. But there aren't that many doing it for reading. They're doing it for entertainment in other ways. So this is a very good bit of advice for everyone. You can get so much out of reading and letting your imagination grow and learn. And good answer. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much for coming and sharing with us today. We wish you and your organization the best, so that we can become a little more rational in this world, or at least in our country. It would be a great thing. So thanks again for sharing with us, and much success in what you're doing. I think we'll all benefit from it.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Susan. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Our pleasure's
Thank
ours.
you.
Yep. And if you're watching this show, please subscribe and give us comments below. Anything, if you want to get a hold of John, please do. The answer of information will be below in the show notes. And again, you're not only helping him with his cause, but you're helping everyone's cause. So get involved. That'll be great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good one. Bye-bye. And we are